Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. We journey back in time to an era of myth, legend, and unprecedented power. An empire that rose from a single city to dominate the known world, shaping the course of Western civilization forever. Its legacy is etched into our laws, our languages, and our architecture. But how did this colossal power emerge? And what led to its spectacular collapse? This is the story of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. To understand the world that forged Theodora, an empress of unimaginable power and complexity, we must travel back to the very dawn of her civilization. We must begin not in the glittering capital of Constantinople, but on the banks of a muddy river, with a story steeped in legend and blood. This is the myth of Rome's founding, the origin story of the empire that would, in time, become Theodora's own. The tale begins with Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa, who is overthrown by his cruel brother, Amulius. To eliminate any future claimants to the throne, Amulius forces Numitor's daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity. But the gods had other plans. The war god, Mars, descends and fathers twin sons with Rhea Silvia, Romulus and Remus. Enraged, King Amulius orders the infants to be thrown into the Tiber River. Miraculously, the basket carrying the twins does not sink, but washes ashore at the foot of the Palatine Hill. There, they are discovered by a she-wolf, the Lupa, who, instead of devouring them, suckles them as her own. Later, they are found by a shepherd, Faustulus, who raises them as his sons. The boys grow into strong, natural leaders, unaware of their royal lineage. Eventually, their true identity is revealed, and they lead a revolt, killing Amulius and restoring their grandfather Numitor to the throne. With their destiny fulfilled, they decide to found a new city near the site of their rescue. However, the brothers quarrel over who should rule it. They agree to settle the dispute by augury, watching for divine omens in the flight of birds. Remus sees 6 vultures first, but Romulus sees 12. Claiming divine favor, Romulus begins plowing the sacred boundary, the Pomerium, for his new city. In a final act of defiance, Remus mocks his brother by jumping over the newly dug trench. In a fit of rage, Romulus strikes his brother down, declaring, "So shall it be for all who dare to cross my walls." This act of fratricide lies at the very heart of Rome's foundation. A city born from divine intervention, savage survival, and brutal ambition. It created a legacy of power, seized and held by any means necessary. A principle that would echo for centuries, right up to the throne of Empress Theodora herself. With Romulus as its first semi-mythical king, Rome began its long, arduous journey, from a small settlement into a formidable power. The era that followed his reign is known as the period of the 7 Kings, a time that shaped the fundamental character of the Roman people and laid the institutional groundwork for the empire Theodora would inherit. For over 2 centuries, Rome was a monarchy. After Romulus, who established the city's initial military and political structures, including the Senate, a succession of 6 other kings followed. These rulers were not all Roman by birth. Some were Sabines, others Etruscans, reflecting the city's early history as a cultural melting pot. Each king contributed something essential to Rome's development. Numa Pompilius established Roman religious customs and the calendar. Tullus Hostilius was a warrior king who expanded Rome's territory by conquering Alba Longa. Ancus Marcius founded the port of Ostia, connecting Rome to the sea and vital trade routes. The later kings were from the Etruscan Tarquin dynasty. Tarquinius Priscus is credited with creating the Roman games and building the Circus Maximus, an institution that would, ironically, be central to Theodora's own early life. Servius Tullius conducted the first census and reformed the army. But the seventh and final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant. His reign was marked by cruelty, bloodshed, and a flagrant disregard for Roman customs and the authority of the Senate. The breaking point came with the rape of the noblewoman Lucretia by the king's son. Her subsequent suicide ignited a rebellion led by Lucius Junius Brutus, who vowed that Rome would never again be ruled by a king. In 509 BCE, the monarchy was overthrown, and the Roman Republic was born. This was a pivotal moment. The Romans developed a deep-seated hatred for the title of king, replacing it with a complex system of elected magistrates, assemblies, and the powerful Senate. This new republic was founded on the principles of law, civic duty, and a distribution of power, concepts that would form the bedrock of the Roman state for 500 years, and whose legacy would be debated and reshaped in the very halls of power where Empress Theodora would later stand. The fledgling Roman Republic, having secured its dominance over the Italian peninsula, soon faced its greatest challenge. Across the Mediterranean, on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, lay the mighty maritime empire of Carthage. A clash between these two rising powers was inevitable, and it would erupt into a series of 3 conflicts known as the Punic Wars, a century-long struggle for supremacy that would define the course of Western civilization and create the superstate that Theodora would one day help govern. The First Punic War was primarily a naval conflict over control of Sicily. Rome, a land-based power, had little to no navy. In a testament to their incredible adaptability and resolve, the Romans built a massive fleet from scratch, reverse engineering a captured Carthaginian warship. After more than 2 decades of brutal fighting, Rome emerged victorious, seizing Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. But the conflict was far from over. The Second Punic War is the most famous, thanks to one of history's most brilliant military commanders, Hannibal Barca. Swearing an oath of eternal hatred for Rome, Hannibal executed a daring and audacious plan. He marched his army, complete with war elephants, from Spain, over the treacherous Alps, and into Italy itself. For 15 years, he inflicted a series of devastating defeats on the Romans, most notably at the Battle of Cannae, where he annihilated a massive Roman army. Rome seemed on the brink of collapse, yet it did not break. The Republic's resilience was its greatest weapon. While Hannibal rampaged through Italy, the Roman general Scipio Africanus took the fight to Carthage's home turf in Africa, forcing Hannibal to return to defend his city. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, Scipio decisively defeated Hannibal, ending the war and shattering Carthage's power. A final Third Punic War decades later was less a war and more an act of total annihilation, as Rome, still fearing its old rival, razed Carthage to the ground. Victory in the Punic Wars transformed Rome. It was no longer just an Italian power. It was the master of the Western Mediterranean, an empire in all but name, whose vast territories and immense wealth set the stage for the world Theodora would be born into. With Carthage destroyed, a power vacuum emerged in the Mediterranean, and Rome was more than willing to fill it. The century and a half following the Punic Wars was an era of relentless explosive expansion. The Roman legions, now seasoned and seemingly invincible, marched east and west, systematically dismantling older empires and bringing vast new territories under their control. The world that Theodora would one day know was being forged in the crucible of these conquests. Having secured the West, Rome turned its attention to the Hellenistic kingdoms of the East, the fragmented remnants of Alexander the Great's empire. One by one, they fell. Macedonia, the homeland of Alexander, was defeated and absorbed. The Greek city-states, despite their proud history, were brought to heel and became a Roman province. The once mighty Seleucid Empire in Asia Minor and the Levant was humbled and its territories seized. Finally, the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, the last and wealthiest of the Hellenistic successors, was annexed after the famous affair between Cleopatra and the Roman general Mark Antony. The Mediterranean Sea, once a contested space of competing empires, was now effectively a Roman lake, which they proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. This expansion was not limited to the east. In the west, Roman legions pushed into the Iberian Peninsula, fighting fierce guerrilla wars against local tribes for decades. In Gaul, Julius Caesar conducted a brilliant and brutal campaign, conquering the vast region that is now modern-day France and Belgium. These conquests brought unimaginable wealth, resources, and slaves flooding back to Rome, transforming its economy and society. However, this rapid expansion came at a price. The republican system, designed to govern a small city-state, began to buckle under the strain of administering a vast, multicultural empire. The immense wealth corrupted politics. The traditional Roman farmer was replaced by massive slave-run estates, and powerful generals with loyal professional armies began to dominate the political landscape, leading to a century of brutal civil wars. The Republic was dying, and from its ashes, a new political order would arise: the Roman Empire, ruled by an emperor. This was the direct political ancestor of the Byzantine Empire, and its transformation set the precedent for the absolute power that would one day be wielded by Emperor Justinian and his remarkable wife, Theodora. The century following the final defeat of Carthage was not one of peace and prosperity for the Roman Republic, but one of deep and festering social crisis. The very wars that had made Rome the master of the Mediterranean had also sown the seeds of its internal decay. Vast wealth poured into the hands of the senatorial elite, who used it to buy up huge tracts of land, creating massive slave-run plantations known as latifundia. The small independent farmer, the traditional backbone of the Roman army and society, was squeezed out. Unable to compete with slave labor, and often returning from long military campaigns to find their farms foreclosed, they flocked to the city of Rome, forming a volatile, landless, and unemployed urban proletariat. This created a dual crisis: a social powder keg in the city and a critical shortage of eligible recruits for the military, which still required property ownership for service. Into this maelstrom stepped two brothers from one of Rome's most distinguished noble families, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. In 133 BC, Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune of the plebs. He proposed a seemingly simple solution: the enforcement of an old law limiting the amount of public land any one individual could hold, with the excess to be redistributed to the landless poor. The senatorial elite, whose wealth was built on this very land, saw this as a direct attack on their property and power. When they convinced another tribune, Marcus Octavius, to veto the bill, Tiberius took the unprecedented step of having the plebeian assembly depose Octavius from office. This shattered centuries of political tradition. The bill passed, but Tiberius had made powerful enemies. When he sought an unprecedented second term as tribune, his opponents claimed he was aiming for tyranny. A mob of senators and their clients, led by the Pontifex Maximus himself, bludgeoned Tiberius and hundreds of his followers to death. For the first time in centuries, political disagreement had been settled with bloodshed in the streets of Rome. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius took up the cause with an even more ambitious reform package. But he too would meet a violent end, cornered by his political enemies and forced to commit suicide as thousands of his supporters were massacred. The Gracchi were dead, but they had irrevocably changed Rome. They had exposed the deep divisions in society and demonstrated that violence could be a potent political tool, setting the stage for the civil wars to come. In the blood-soaked aftermath of the Marian and Sullan civil wars, the Roman Republic was a hollowed-out shell. The old institutions of the Senate and the assemblies still existed, but real power now lay with ambitious individuals who could command armies, wealth, and popular support. It was in this environment that a young nobleman named Gaius Julius Caesar began his ascent. Born into the ancient patrician Julian clan, Caesar had impeccable aristocratic credentials, yet his family ties linked him directly to the populist cause of Marius. This connection nearly cost him his life during Sulla's proscriptions, an experience that taught him the brutal realities of Roman power politics from a young age. Caesar possessed a rare combination of charm, intellect, ruthless ambition, and a genius for self-promotion. He spent lavishly, incurring monumental debts to stage public games and cultivate a following among the common people of Rome, positioning himself as their champion against the entrenched oligarchy. His path to supreme power, however, could not be walked alone. In 60 BC, he forged an informal but potent alliance with two of Rome's most powerful men: Gnaeus Pompeius, known as Pompey the Great, the Republic's most celebrated general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man of immense wealth. This alliance, known to history as the First Triumvirate, was a private pact to dominate the state, bypassing the Senate to achieve their personal goals. As consul in 59 BC, Caesar aggressively pushed through their agenda, securing for himself a 5-year command as governor of Gaul. It was here, far from the intrigues of Rome, that Caesar would forge his legend. For nearly a decade, he waged the Gallic Wars, a brilliant, brutal, and systematic campaign of conquest. He subdued hundreds of tribes, crossed the Rhine into Germania, and even launched 2 expeditions to Britain. The wars brought him unimaginable wealth from plunder and slaves, allowing him to pay off his debts and bribe politicians back in Rome. More importantly, it gave him a battle-hardened, fanatically loyal army that knew no master but Caesar. He chronicled his achievements in his commentaries on the Gallic War, a masterclass in political propaganda that kept his name on everyone's lips in Rome. But as Caesar's power grew, the triumvirate that had enabled it began to crumble. Crassus was killed fighting the Parthians, and the personal bond between Caesar and Pompey was severed with the death of Caesar's daughter Julia, who was Pompey's wife. Pompey, now sole consul and increasingly aligned with the conservative senators, watched Caesar's rise with growing alarm. The stage was being set for a final, cataclysmic confrontation between Rome's 2 greatest generals. By 49 BC, the Roman Republic stood on the brink of another greater civil war. The Senate, now championed by Pompey the Great, saw Julius Caesar and his loyal legions in Gaul as an existential threat. They issued an ultimatum. Caesar must disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen to stand for the consulship. For Caesar, this was a death sentence. He knew that without the legal immunity of his office and the protection of his soldiers, his political enemies, led by hardliners like Cato the Younger, would immediately prosecute and destroy him. Cornered, he made a decision that would change the course of history forever. Leading his 13th Legion to the banks of the Rubicon, the small river that marked the boundary of his province, he hesitated for a moment before uttering the immortal words, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. In crossing the Rubicon with his army, Caesar committed an irrevocable act of treason and declared war on the Senate. His advance was shockingly swift. He swept down the Italian peninsula with such speed that Pompey and the majority of the Senate were forced to abandon Rome and flee across the Adriatic to Greece. After securing Italy and neutralizing Pompey's forces in Spain, Caesar pursued his rival. The decisive confrontation came in 48 BC on the plains of Pharsalus in Greece. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Caesar's military genius and the experience of his veteran legions won him a stunning victory. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was ignominiously murdered on the orders of the boy king, Ptolemy III. The war, however, was not over. Caesar spent the next few years stamping out the last embers of senatorial resistance in Egypt, Africa, and Spain. When he finally returned to Rome, his power was absolute. He was made dictator, first for 10 years, and then, in early 44 BC, dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. He initiated a flurry of practical reforms, but his accumulation of titles and honors, his statue placed among those of the kings, and his regal bearing deeply offended the sensibilities of the Roman aristocracy. A conspiracy formed, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, men who believed they were acting to save the Republic from a tyrant. On the Ides of March 15th, 44 BC, as Caesar entered a meeting of the Senate, the conspirators surrounded him and stabbed him to death at the foot of a statue of his great rival, Pompey. They called themselves the Liberators, but their act of violence did not restore the Republic. Instead, it extinguished the life of its most powerful man and plunged the Roman world into 13 more years of bloody civil war, a conflict that would ultimately give rise to an emperor and forge an empire. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March in 44 BC did not restore the Republic as his killers had hoped. Instead, it plunged the Roman world into a new and more vicious cycle of civil war. In the ensuing power vacuum, 3 men emerged to dominate the political landscape. The first was Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal and charismatic general, who saw himself as the natural successor. The second was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another of Caesar's powerful allies. And the third was a figure few took seriously at first: Gaius Octavius, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son, a sickly but ruthlessly ambitious 19-year-old. Known to history as Octavian, he arrived in Rome to claim his inheritance, not just Caesar's wealth, but his powerful name and the loyalty of his legions. After a period of shifting alliances and open conflict, these 3 men realized that fighting each other would only benefit their common enemies, the senators, who had murdered Caesar. In 43 BC, they formalized their alliance, creating the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the first informal pact between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, this was a legal institution granting them supreme authority for 5 years to hunt down their enemies and restore order. Their first act was a brutal and terrifying one: the proscriptions. They posted lists of their political and personal enemies, condemning them to death without trial and confiscating their property. It was a state-sanctioned bloodbath that eliminated hundreds of senators and thousands of equestrians, its most famous victim being the great orator Cicero. With their rivals in Rome exterminated and their treasury filled, the triumvirs turned their attention to the assassins, Brutus and Cassius, who had amassed a large army in the east. In 42 BC, at the twin battles of Philippi in Macedonia, the forces of the triumvirate decisively crushed the last remnants of the Republican cause. With their shared enemies defeated, the victors divided the Roman world among themselves. Antony took the rich and glamorous East, Lepidus was assigned Africa, and Octavian was left with the difficult and restive West, including Italy. This division of power set the stage for the final, inevitable confrontation for ultimate control of Rome. Following the victory at Philippi, the Second Triumvirate was a partnership built on ambition, not trust. Lepidus was quickly sidelined, leaving the Roman world split between two titans: Octavian in the west and Mark Antony in the east. While Octavian painstakingly consolidated his power base in Italy, dealing with land shortages and disgruntled veterans, Antony established his headquarters in Alexandria, Egypt. There, he renewed his infamous affair with the Ptolemaic queen, Cleopatra. Their political and romantic alliance became Octavian's greatest propaganda weapon. Back in Rome, he skillfully portrayed Antony not as a fellow Roman, but as a man who had abandoned his heritage, a puppet of a seductive foreign queen with ambitions to rule Rome from Egypt. The tension escalated until open war became unavoidable. The final confrontation came in 31 BC at the naval battle of Actium, off the coast of Greece. It was a decisive victory for Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Marcus Agrippa. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, their forces shattered and their cause lost. A year later, as Octavian's legions closed in on Alexandria, they both took their own lives. At just 32 years old, Octavian was the undisputed master of the Roman world. He had ended a century of civil war, but he knew that Romans deeply distrusted the idea of a king. So he performed a political masterstroke. In 27 BC, he made a show of returning power to the Senate and the Roman people. In gratitude, the Senate bestowed upon him the new title Augustus, meaning the revered one, and the name by which he would forever be known. He carefully maintained the facade of the Republic, its offices and traditions, while holding the true power, control of the army, the treasury, and the provinces. This new political order, the Principate, ushered in an unprecedented era of stability and prosperity, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For over 2 centuries, the Mediterranean world was largely free from major conflict, allowing for a flourishing of trade, engineering, law, and culture that would define the Roman Empire at its zenith. Augustus had masterfully established a new system of rule, but he failed to solve the fundamental problem of succession. His long reign was haunted by the deaths of his chosen heirs, and he was ultimately forced to name his stepson, the grim and reluctant Tiberius, as his successor. The dynasty Augustus founded, the Julio-Claudian, would rule Rome for nearly a century, a period defined by moments of administrative genius, punctuated by episodes of grotesque paranoia, debauchery, and terror. Tiberius's reign began capably, but descended into darkness as he grew increasingly suspicious of the Senate, relying on the ruthless Praetorian prefect Sejanus, and ultimately retreating to the island of Capri, from where he ruled through fear. His death brought his grandnephew Caligula to power. Initially welcomed, Caligula's reign quickly devolved into tyranny, marked by his legendary extravagance, cruelty, and claims of divinity. His erratic behavior proved intolerable, and in 41 AD he was assassinated by the very men sworn to protect him, the Praetorian Guard. In the confusion, the guards found Caligula's uncle, the trembling and bookish Claudius, hiding behind a curtain and unexpectedly hailed him as emperor. Mocked for his physical infirmities, Claudius proved to be a surprisingly effective ruler, overseeing the conquest of Britain and major public works. Yet his reign was plagued by the betrayals of his wives, culminating in his probable murder by his ambitious final wife, Agrippina, to clear the way for her son, Nero. Nero's rule is perhaps the most infamous. It began under the guidance of his tutor Seneca, but soon spiraled into a spectacle of artistic pretension, familial murder, and megalomania. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, which he blamed on the nascent Christian community, and his subsequent construction of the lavish Golden House on the ruins, sealed his reputation for tyranny. Faced with widespread rebellion, he was declared a public enemy by the Senate and took his own life, uttering the famous words, "What an artist dies in me." His death marked the ignominious end of the Julio-Claudian line, leaving Rome without a master and on the brink of chaos. The suicide of Nero in 68 AD extinguished the last spark of the Julio-Claudian dynasty that had ruled Rome for a century. With no clear heir, a dangerous power vacuum opened, and the Roman historian Tacitus would later reveal a new and dangerous secret of the empire, that an emperor could be made elsewhere than in Rome. The year that followed, 69 AD, was a period of brutal and chaotic civil war, known as the Year of the Four Emperors. The first to claim the throne was Servius Sulpicius Galba, the governor of Spain. An elderly, disciplined aristocrat, he marched on Rome and secured the Senate's approval. However, his harsh austerity and refusal to pay the donatives promised to the soldiers who supported him made him deeply unpopular. His reign lasted only 7 months before he was murdered in the Roman Forum by the Praetorian Guard. The guards promptly proclaimed one of their own backers, Marcus Salvius Otho, as the new emperor. But Otho's claim was immediately challenged. On the Rhine frontier, the powerful legions had already hailed their own commander, Aulus Vitellius, as emperor. Armies that once fought foreign enemies now marched against each other. At the First Battle of Bedriacum in northern Italy, Vitellius's forces defeated Otho's. Choosing to spare Rome further civil war, Otho took his own life after ruling for a mere 3 months. Vitellius entered Rome not as a savior, but as a conqueror, and his brief reign was characterized by feasting and profligacy. While he indulged himself in the capital, the legions stationed in the east found their own candidate. In July, the armies in Egypt, Judea, and Syria declared their revered general, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, Vespasian, as emperor. As Vespasian secured control of Egypt's vital grain supply, his subordinate Antonius Primus led the Danubian legions on a swift and brutal invasion of Italy. In the Second Battle of Bedriacum, they crushed The Vitellian forces. The ensuing march on Rome was a horrific affair, culminating in a bloody battle in the city's streets. Vitellius was captured, tortured, and killed. Vespasian's arrival restored order, ending the bloodshed and establishing the stable, pragmatic Flavian dynasty. To understand the world that Theodora and Justinian sought to reclaim, we must first travel back to an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity. A golden age that would haunt the memory of Rome for 1,000 years. This was the time of the 5 good emperors, a period stretching from 96 to 180 AD, when the Roman Empire reached its absolute zenith. It began with Nerva, an elderly senator who established a new precedent for succession: adoption based on merit, not blood. He chose the brilliant general Trajan as his heir, a decision that ushered in an age of stability. Under Trajan, the empire expanded to its greatest territorial extent, stretching from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Mesopotamia. His massive building projects, like the famous Forum and Column in Rome, were not just monuments to his glory, but symbols of an empire brimming with confidence and wealth. His successor, Hadrian, was a different kind of ruler. A tireless administrator and a lover of Greek culture, he consolidated the borders, building his famous wall in Britain and strengthening defenses along the Rhine and Danube. He traveled relentlessly, visiting nearly every province, ensuring the vast machinery of the state ran smoothly. Under Antoninus Pius, the empire enjoyed a period of profound tranquility, a long, quiet afternoon of Roman power, where the peace seemed unshakable. The final of the 5, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, embodied the Platonic ideal of a ruler. Yet his reign was beset by wars on the frontiers and a devastating plague that swept through the empire, a dark premonition of the troubles to come. This era of the Pax Romana was the foundation upon which the later Byzantine identity was built. It established the legal codes, the road networks, the aqueducts, and the very idea of a universal civilized Roman state that Justinian, with Theodora at his side, would later fight so desperately to restore. It was the dream of a lost perfection, a standard against which all future emperors would be measured. The heart of the Roman world was not just its legions or its laws, but the sprawling, chaotic, and vibrant life of its cities, sustained by a simple yet effective political formula: panem et circenses, or bread and circuses. This was the social contract that kept the teeming urban masses fed, entertained, and most importantly, placated. The bread came in the form of the cura annoni, a massive state-run grain dole that provided subsidized or free food for hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens. This logistical marvel, dependent on fleets sailing from Egypt and North Africa, was the lifeblood of the capital. The circuses, however, were the soul. The Roman appetite for spectacle was insatiable. The Colosseum hosted brutal gladiatorial contests and wild beast hunts, while public baths served as vast social centers for citizens of all classes. But the true passion of the people, the spectacle that dwarfed all others, was the chariot racing at the Circus Maximus. Here society was divided into factions, most famously, the Blues and the Greens. These were more than mere sporting teams. They were social and political movements, with fierce loyalties that could spill over into citywide riots. The charioteers were superstars, adored by millions. Yet they, like all entertainers, actors, mimes, and dancers, occupied a paradoxical place in society. They were celebrities, but they were also infames people of shameful status, denied the basic rights of a Roman citizen. They could not vote, hold office, or even testify in court without being tortured. This was the world that would produce Theodora. Her father was a bear-keeper for the Green faction at the Hippodrome in Constantinople, placing her at the very bottom of this glittering yet degraded social ladder. She was born into the heart of the circus, a world of exhilarating spectacle and profound social stigma. A world she would have to not only survive, but conquer. The golden age of the Antonines could not last. The murder of the last Severan emperor in 235 AD plunged the Roman world into a half-century of chaos, a period so violent and destructive it nearly shattered the empire forever. This was the crisis of the 3rd century. The system of orderly succession collapsed, replaced by the bloody politics of the barracks. Ambitious generals, proclaimed emperor by their legions, marched on Rome, initiating a relentless cycle of civil war. In just 50 years, more than 25 so-called barracks emperors rose and fell, most meeting a violent end after ruling for only a few months. This constant internal warfare left the frontiers dangerously exposed. Barbarian tribes, Goths, Franks, and Alemanni, poured across the Rhine and Danube, sacking cities that had not seen an enemy for centuries. In the east, the aggressive new Sasanian Empire of Persia posed an existential threat, even capturing the Emperor Valerian in battle, a humiliation that shook Rome to its core. Compounding the military disaster was a complete economic meltdown. To pay their mutinous soldiers, emperors drastically debased the currency, mixing the silver denarius with base metals until it was virtually worthless. Hyperinflation raged, trade ground to a halt, and citizens reverted to a barter economy. A devastating plague, likely smallpox, swept through the empire, killing millions and depopulating entire regions. The universal state seemed to be disintegrating. Usurper empires, like the Gallic Empire in the west and the Palmyrene Empire in the east, broke away, challenging the authority of the central government. The world of predictable laws, safe roads, and shared culture that the 5 good emperors had overseen was vanishing, replaced by fear, uncertainty, and brutal, localized survival. This catastrophic period fundamentally reshaped the Roman psyche and state. The empire that would eventually emerge from this crucible would be harder, more militarized, and more autocratic. A necessary transformation that laid the groundwork for the world Theodora would inherit. Out of the ashes of the 3rd century crisis rose a figure of immense will and revolutionary vision, Diocletian. A low-born soldier from Dalmatia who seized the throne in 284 AD, he understood that the old imperial system was broken beyond repair. To save the empire, he would have to remake it entirely. His most radical reform was political. Recognizing that the empire was too vast for one man to govern effectively, he instituted the tetrarchy, or rule of 4. He appointed a co-emperor, Maximian, to rule the west, while he governed the wealthier and more strategic east. Each senior emperor, or Augustus, then adopted a junior emperor, a Caesar, who would be his designated heir. This was designed to solve the twin problems of succession and administration, creating a stable, imperial college. Diocletian's reforms touched every aspect of life. He reorganized the provinces, separating civil and military authority, to prevent ambitious governors from launching rebellions. He reformed the tax system to create a more stable budget and attempted to curb runaway inflation with his famous, though ultimately unsuccessful, edict on maximum prices. More profoundly, he transformed the very nature of the emperorship. The emperor was no longer the princeps, the first citizen, but the dominus, the master. He adopted elaborate court ceremonies and Persian-style robes, making himself a remote, godlike figure, accessible only through a labyrinth of officials. This was the birth of the dominate, an openly autocratic system that would define the late Roman and Byzantine state. Ruling from his new capital in Nicomedia in the east, Diocletian permanently shifted the empire's center of gravity away from Rome. While his tetrarchy would not survive him, its legacy was immense. It was the blueprint for the eventual formal division of the empire, and created the rigid, hierarchical, and powerful state that Constantine would inherit, and that Theodora, centuries later, would learn to navigate with unparalleled skill. To comprehend the world that forged Theodora, we must first travel back 2 centuries before her birth, to a pivotal moment that would forever alter the destiny of Rome. The early 4th century was a time of turmoil, with the vast empire straining under the weight of its own immensity and internal division. From this chaos emerged a figure of monumental importance, Constantine the Great. His rise to power was marked by brutal civil war, culminating in the legendary Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. It was here on the eve of battle that Constantine reportedly saw a vision of a Christian symbol in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In this sign, you shall conquer." Whether a genuine miracle or a stroke of political genius, Constantine embraced the burgeoning Christian faith, a decision that would redirect the course of Western civilization. His victory led to the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which granted religious tolerance throughout the empire, effectively ending the systematic persecution of Christians. But Constantine's vision extended beyond just faith. He recognized that the old Rome, steeped in pagan tradition and strategically vulnerable, was no longer a suitable capital for his new Christian empire. He looked east to a place of immense strategic and commercial value, the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. Situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, controlling the vital Bosphorus Strait, it was the perfect location. In 330 AD, he inaugurated his new capital, lavishly rebuilt and renamed Nova Roma, or New Rome, though it would soon become popularly known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. This was not merely a change of address, it was the dawn of a new era. Constantinople was conceived as a Christian capital from its inception, a stark contrast to the pagan heritage of its predecessor. This act laid the foundation for what would become the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that saw itself as the direct continuation of Roman glory, but now centered on Hellenic culture and Orthodox Christianity. The political, religious, and cultural DNA of Theodora's future empire was encoded in these decisions, creating the unique world she would one day rule. The foundation of Constantinople created a new center of gravity for the Roman world, but the empire remained, for a time, a single entity. However, the immense administrative challenges of governing such a vast territory, from the shores of Britain to the sands of Mesopotamia, persisted. The practice of appointing co-emperors to rule different regions had become common, a pragmatic solution to a logistical nightmare. This practice reached its definitive conclusion under Emperor Theodosius I. A staunch defender of Nicene Christianity, Theodosius was the last emperor to rule over a fully united Roman Empire, Upon his death in 395 AD, his final will and testament would cleave the Roman world in two, a division from which it would never recover. He bequeathed the Western Roman Empire to his younger son, Honorius, and the Eastern Roman Empire to his elder son, Arcadius. This was intended not as a permanent separation, but as an administrative division to ensure stability. History, however, had other plans. The two halves began to drift apart almost immediately, their trajectories diverging at an accelerating pace. The West, with its capital shifting between Milan and Ravenna, spoke Latin and faced immense, immediate military pressure on its long land borders. It was economically more fragile, its agricultural lands often ravaged by conflict. The East centered on the magnificent and heavily fortified Constantinople, was predominantly Greek-speaking, wealthier, and more urbanized. It controlled the prosperous trade routes to Asia and possessed a more stable professional bureaucracy and a more easily defensible geography. While Honorius's court in the West grappled with constant invasions and political instability, Arcadius's court in the East consolidated its power, developing a distinct political and cultural identity. The chasm between them widened, transforming a simple administrative line into a profound cultural and political fracture. The Eastern Empire, which we now call Byzantium, increasingly saw itself as the true guardian of Roman tradition, while the West slowly crumbled. This division set the stage for centuries of separate development, ensuring that when Theodora was born, she would inherit the legacy not of a united Rome, but of its resilient, powerful, and distinctly Eastern successor. The formal division of the empire in 395 AD occurred at a moment of unprecedented global upheaval, often called the Migration Period. For decades, various Germanic and Asiatic peoples, Goths, Vandals, Franks, Lombards, and the fearsome Huns, were pressing against the Roman frontiers. The reasons were complex: climate change, internal conflicts, and the domino effect of displacement as one group pushed another forward. The newly separated Western and Eastern empires faced this tidal wave of humanity with vastly different resources and strategies. The Western Empire, already economically weakened and politically unstable, bore the brunt of the onslaught. Its long, permeable borders along the Rhine and Danube rivers were nearly impossible to defend. The Roman legions, increasingly composed of barbarian mercenaries of questionable loyalty, struggled to contain the incursions. The saga of the West in the 5th century is one of relentless crisis. Alaric the Visigoth sacked the city of Rome itself in 410, an event that sent shockwaves across the civilized world. The Vandals crossed from Spain into North Africa, capturing the vital province and its grain supply, and later sailing across the Mediterranean to sack Rome again in 455. Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, carved a path of destruction through Gaul and Italy, threatening the very existence of the empire. In contrast, the Eastern Empire proved far more resilient. Its capital, Constantinople, was a nearly impregnable fortress, protected by the massive Theodosian walls. Its compact geography was easier to defend, and its robust economy, fueled by Eastern trade, allowed it to fund a powerful army and navy. More importantly, the Eastern emperors became masters of diplomacy and statecraft. When unable to defeat an enemy militarily, they would pay them off with lavish subsidies, turning potential conquerors into paid allies. They skillfully played different barbarian groups against one another, deflecting threats westward, away from their own heartlands. This combination of military strength, strategic depth, and cunning diplomacy ensured the survival and even prosperity of the East, while the West was being dismembered piece by piece. This starkly different fate was the inheritance of Theodora's world, a powerful, wealthy, and secure empire surrounded by the ruins of its other half. The year 476 AD is the date traditionally etched in history books as the end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet, for those living at the time, it may not have felt like a sudden, cataclysmic collapse. It was rather the final, whimpering sigh of an authority that had been bleeding out for decades. By this point, the Western Empire was a hollow shell of its former self. Its emperors were often powerless puppets, installed and deposed at will by powerful barbarian generals who held the real military authority. The last of these shadow emperors was a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, his name combining that of Rome's mythical founder and its first emperor. His reign was short and insignificant. The true power was his father, Orestes, but even he could not control the Foederati, the barbarian mercenary troops that now constituted the bulk of the Roman army. When their leader, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, demanded land in Italy for his people and was refused, he took matters into his own hands. He executed Orestes and marched on the capital of Ravenna. There, he deposed the young Romulus Augustulus. But instead of proclaiming himself emperor, Odoacer did something profoundly symbolic. He had the Western imperial regalia, the diadem, the purple robes, and the standards, packed up and sent to Zeno, the Eastern Roman emperor in Constantinople. The accompanying message declared that the West no longer required an emperor of its own, and that one emperor residing in New Rome was sufficient for the entire world. Zeno, while formally accepting this gesture, granted Odoacer the title of patrician and recognized his authority to govern Italy as a viceroy of the Eastern Empire. For Constantinople, this was not the end of the Roman Empire. It was a reunification, a restoration of the proper order of things. The fiction of a divided rule was over. Now there was only one true Roman emperor, and he sat on the throne in Constantinople. This event cemented the Byzantine self-perception as the sole, legitimate heir to the legacy of Augustus and Constantine. It also created the political and ideological justification for the great ambition that would define the age of Theodora and her husband, Justinian, the Reconquista, the dream of reclaiming the lost Western provinces and restoring the Roman Empire to its full, unified glory.